is the best yet to come. Think about it for the next convention. Digital television, ATSC, something none of us probably have hands-on with, but the next generation will, and it's confusing.
Our last analog off-air convention.
Oh, yeah. But what the heck, we're all analog. All of us sitting here are analog. We probably will never transition to digital the way the world will. Oh, there we got a picture. And away we go. Well, it looks like we have sequence, we have communication, and here we go. I introduce James O'Neal, friends. Let's go.
Right here? Right here. Let me park the mic so I've got a hand free to change it. Can we pull the house lights down a little bit, Steve? We can a little better image. Actually, the title slide here is a little bit of a, let me move this mic down so it's not right in my face. So the title slide is a little bit of a misnomer. Actually, I'm going to go back a little before the 1940s. I've got some from the 1930s, and I've got one or two that goes back before that. But what this is about, a couple of years ago, I was doing a lot of research on trying to substantiate the claim that Fessenden did the world's first radio broadcast 100 years ago in December of 1906. By the way, I could not substantiate that. I spent many months in 2006 digging through archives, and while I was digging, I came across some television pictures I'd never really seen before. So I made copies of those, and I want to share some of those with you. It's quite a find. Some of these things I've never seen anywhere. We've got some mysteries here I can't resolve. Maybe somebody will be able to shed a little bit of light on some of these things. So without further ado, let me go ahead and start with the first image. You've all seen this one, I'm sure. This is what NBC was doing, the early mechanical video. But have you seen this one? This is C. Francis Jenkins' lab, Silver Spring, Maryland, W3XK. They were transmitting radio movies there. This was in the pile of pictures that I happened to find. I think it's rather interesting to look how simple his mechanism was. Obviously, this is before he was using his prismatic scanning rings. So moving on to the future of television, electronic television. Here's one of the earliest images I found. This is RCA's iconoscope camera. It's you've seen a lot of these possibly. It's a twin lens reflex camera. Does not have an electronic viewfinder. Has an optical viewfinder. Picture can't really date it precisely, but if you look, the telephone is very obviously 1930s. The hairstyles, the clothing puts it, I'd say, mid 1930s. One thing that's interesting about the camera, I think this is a very staged picture, because these people seem to be fairly comfortable, and yet especially the cameraman has got a pretty heavy coat on. Well, also the camera's painted black. You don't see many of these cameras painted black. I talked to an NBC lighting man once who was there, and he said the base lighting to get a good picture with the iconoscope was 1,000 foot candles. Then you add in your key lighting, your fill lighting, your back lighting. You might add, it might be 2,400 foot candles before you're ready to go on the air. And of course, these were radio studios by and large at 30 Rock, which were being adapted for television with light towers. Certainly the air conditioning for radio was not nearly as demanding as for television, so it got pretty warm. So the rest of the pictures of the cameras you'll see, I've seen one color picture. It's sort of an aluminum color. So we'll move on and look at the, here's one here. Interesting thing, too, about the viewfinder, again, this is an optical viewfinder. It's like a twin lens reflex camera. I don't know, but I would assume both lenses are on some sort of a rack and pinion, and you focus the optical viewfinders, you focus the image on the mosaic of the iconoscope. And unless you got really fancy with your optical system, the image the camera operator saw was probably inverted up and down and side to side. So he had to get used to that. This is an interesting shot, too. This is the first iteration of a film chain. I wish we had a little bit more detail here on the right side. This is obviously an iconoscope camera. There's a wall here. On the other side of the wall, there's some projectors, probably 35. I'm sure this was required by fire code because there was nitrate film then. So you had a firewall, you had shutters to shut off the side with the projectors if the nitrate film caught fire. And these cameras could move back and forth. I think it was one camera here at this time, could move back and forth to these portholes that were opened facing the projectors to put a particular projector on the air. And just look at the size of this cable that's connecting the camera to the rest of the electronics. I mean, you talk about a fire hose cable. Fairly conventional, looks like almost a late 20s, early 30s monitor speaker here. You've got, it looks like if you really look hard, you can see two cathode ray tubes there for monitoring and some audio. So apparently the person who was shading film presentations may have put in some background audio too, just to kill time. I don't know. This one, I went too far. Let me get back. Okay, this is something that was done apparently after television went commercial in mid-1941 and before the war curtailed broadcasting efforts. Again, see what I say about the amount of light in the picture, and the cameras now are all painted this light color. You see people are pretty well dressed down. Here are a couple of guys in T-shirts, suspenders. Nobody's got a jacket and tie or suit on. They're all trying to be comfortable. Here's Elsie Borden back here. This is a Borden-sponsored show or Borden commercial, and there's some actor there with this Elsie Borden hood on. Must have been hell in there. But it's quite busy there. You've got 4 cameras. You've got art cards. You've got some miniatures there. The ice cream container. Another set back there. Camera shooting. So you've got a floor director. Everybody's very busy doing this live commercial. But again, interesting looking how television was almost 70 years ago. New York wasn't the only place where you had television, and it was said that Klaus Landsberg, who worked in the German television project, came to work for RCA a while, then went to work for Dumont, took a couple of Dumont iconoscope cameras, which you see here, out to California, and put W6XYZ on the air around 1942. And these are the shading controls for the cameras. He was innovative, I said, because Dumont did not use an optical viewfinder with his iconoscope camera. He used a side-mounted electronic viewfinder. Again, Dumont was noted for making CRTs in various sizes. So again, you see the tremendous amount of light just for this art card, even they're telecasting there. These cameras, nobody seems to be able to come up with a number, but here are 4 brand spanking new Dumont iconoscope cameras apparently being readied for shipment there at the Dumont factory. Let me show you another picture here too. You can see the cameras there lined up, the shading consoles, power supplies, whatever else, all ready to go somewhere. Somebody's bought these 4 cameras and they're ready to ship there from the Dumont factory. This picture is interesting too. I left a little bit of the title. These pictures were not terribly identified as to what they were. Some of them there was no identification at all. Others it was spotty. Some of it is rather speculative. But I left this on the bottom, the beginning of television in the United States. This was taken in 1946 in Studio 3H at 30 Rock. There are about 55 people here. This is one of these cameras, these twin-lens reflex iconoscope cameras, that's about to give way, as Alex said, to the image orthicon. But the beginning of television in the United States, this is the engineering pool that RCA, NBC had pulled together to begin regular television operations after the war. Again, this was taken sometime probably in early 1946. But it's kind of interesting to see the genesis of television there. Also, people were breaking ground for other television stations. I believe this was done at Mount Wilson, KNBH. And you see, if you look really carefully, let me get around here, you can see what looks like an emulation of the antenna on the Empire State Building in this bit of the sign. Now, who's going to go up to Mount Wilson to read the sign, I don't know, but it was quite an impressive thing there for the groundbreaking of the transmitter facility. In the back, you see another antenna up behind the building. Again, this is one of these mystery pictures. This was dated 1946, and these are obviously image orthicon cameras. But I've not been able to talk to anybody who has been able to identify the camera. They're built by NBC, obviously. But coming up with a model number, I've got some more pictures of these. The cameras had sort of a inverted T profile, 3-lens turreted cameras. And apparently they made more than one. Obviously, you see 4 here for these pictures. And here's another shot of the one with the camera open. But what was really mystifying on the identification that did exist with this, it said the camera was made to take both 3-inch and 4.5-inch image orthicons. Well, I think there's a mistake there because I really don't think the 4.5-inch I/O came around until the 1960s and was only used in 2 RCA cameras and 1 Marconi camera before the color era came along and killed the 4.5-inch I/O for monochrome purposes. But if anybody can shed any light on that camera, what it might have been called or how many they made, I would be very curious. Pardon? Yep. In the 40s, really? Because it said they had not standardized on the size, so maybe that legend with the picture was somewhat factual. Okay, again, getting serious about doing television after the war. This is NBC's first attempt at a video control room, I believe on the 5th floor of the building there at 30 Rock. I talked to a fellow who went to work for NBC in the early 70s. He said this was pretty much intact. These big round speakers up at the top right were gone by the time he got there, but everything else you see in this picture was pretty much as it was when this picture was taken. I'm guessing late 40s, early 50s, but this was the beginnings of the NBC television network. People were building studios too. This is an example of an early studio construction at CBS. Again, they were preparing studios especially built for television now, not trying to adapt to radio studios or hotel ballrooms or other similar facilities for television use. This was an interesting that came up too. Maybe you've seen these. I know there's one here in Ohio. I can see it from the interstate as I'm going over toward Indiana. This is an architect's rendering, obviously, of something that AT&T did to get video across country. Again, this was long before satellite, so the only way you had to link these stations in a network configuration was by coax and microwave radio. And it's sort of interesting. You see the cars down at the base of the thing. The concept was that the equipment was not going to be that reliable, so you had to have 24/7 staffing of this thing to keep replacing tubes to keep these microwave links on the air located every 35 miles across the country. And of course that quickly went away, but there were living quarters here, sort of like keepers at a lighthouse. They were keeping the microwave on the air. Yeah. AT&T was very much involved, of course, in network operations. They had the monopoly, AT&T long lines, on transmitting first radio signals to network affiliates and later television. This is sort of interesting because this was around when I got into television back in the late 60s, early 70s. Actually, the station I worked for in New Haven, we were the first hop on ABC going east out of New York City, and we had a PL, or direct telephone line, with the New York AT&T long lines facility. So if we had a problem or wanted to switch, you just picked up the telephone, it automatically rang in New York, and you had somebody usually within just a few seconds. That was service. Long since gone. But you see they've got 3 or 4 positions where they're monitoring feeds, where they're able to do some patching and switching. So it was a fairly labor-intensive operation to move video around at that time. And again, just sort of fascinating to look back. Now you plank a satellite dish behind a station and pull down whatever you need, and I don't think there's a phone number to call, or you call it, nobody answers. They answer over in India somewhere. Okay, moving right along. Of course, television, not everything could come out of the studio, so you had to set up to do remotes. Chuck talked about that a bit. And I found some interesting shots of some remote trucks, remote vans. I think this is one of NBC's first. It's parked around Rockefeller Plaza. I don't know what the event was, but it certainly brought out a lot of people. And you can tell by looking at the hats and the hairstyles and the dress, it's probably late 40s, early 50s. Now, what I've read historically is there were 2 of these units. One contained the cameras, shading, switching, and the other unit was involved in getting the signal back to the station. Of course, here they are right there near the NBC network facility, so you only had one van. I did find a picture with 2 vans involved in some kind of a remote. See a lot of cables going back and forth, possibly to a sports venue, stadium or something. And I'm assuming that the microwave dish, one of these is feeding, is up on top of the press box at the stadium, some high elevation. But it's kind of interesting to look back and take a look at these. You can see some of the 1930s, maybe 1940s cars back here in the back. But that's the way it was done a long time ago. Chuck talked about this a little bit. This is the TJ-48, TJ-50. CBS, of course, bought one, or probably more. It's kind of interesting how many times you see CBS in the picture, on the camera, on the side of the building there, and up here, this neon sign. But it was very much a CBS brand new remote vehicle. But things moved along. Here's a little bit later model RCA. You see it's a little bit more streamlined and sleek. And RCA was not the only one to make remote trucks. Dumont got in the act. This thing looks rather clunky, but I suppose it worked for what it had to do. A little bit later, Dumont Camera, they've given away from the Iconoscope to the Image Orthicon. This is a Model 124 camera up on top. And here's another Dumont truck. This one's still a little bit more sleek, WBTV out of Pittsburgh. that was a member of the Dumont group for a time. Again, the microwave and the 2-camera position on top of the van. So, before we go any further, anybody here from Cleveland? I can't tell my greater Cleveland joke. Well, anyway, I'm going to move on here. At one time, I really don't know why, NBC had an owned and operated, or an O&O station in Cleveland. That was WNBK. They put television on there in 1948. And some of these NBC pictures I have came through that were shot at WNBK when it was an NBC O&O. Now, here's a guy. If you look carefully, you can see Cleveland Stadium here. This is Lake Erie here in the background, too. The guy's up on the roof of the building where the television station was located, and they've got a radome over the microwave dish to keep the weather away from the dish. I mean, I've seen radomes, nothing you could actually walk into. I think it's sort of interesting, too. I've climbed towers. I've done a lot of microwave work. I never wore a business suit up when I was sighting in a microwave link, but and just out of curiosity, here's what was down below. This was the studio control room. Again,